Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Apologies for being late to this military aid Ukraine war news video. I was planning to do this 10 minutes ago and I was still at my parents' house doing stuff whereby I'm helping my parents, because you get to a certain age, right? And I do understand this. Like, things are difficult when you haven't grown up with tech, right? Here I am sitting here. I'm sitting here with 3 screens, like very adept at using technology and going on my phone and moving between different devices, doing all my banking by this app and doing my, ordering prescription pills through that app. And my parents are, best part of 80, and they're having to do the same because that's how the world works these days. And so you go around and like, oh, I need you to come around. Yeah, okay, I'll show you how to log on to this app for the 12th time. So write this down. You need to follow exactly this procedure. But it must be difficult, getting old and having to deal with society just being entirely operating in a manner with which you're just not trained. And so there you go. Anyway, happy to be here talking to you guys. There's an awful lot of stuff to go through because just a lot has been going on, and I haven't done a military aid video for a few days, but sometimes that's not a problem. Not much happens in the military aid side of things, but because it depends on all these nations coming together and helping out Ukraine, often around the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the Ramstein, or when Zelensky's going around to different nations, asking for help and so on and so forth, or something big happens and then nations get together and say, oh, okay, we need to help you, here's a bunch of stuff. But just recently, it just seems to be just a consistent amount of aid and finances going to Ukraine, and then Ukraine is also developing a lot of their own stuff now. So we've got into a really rich period of Ukraine's military industrial complex starting to bear fruit, and I think that's partly why we're getting quite a lot of news. So let's get into it. I'm going to move my face onto that side of the screen. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you haven't already done so. That would be really super helpful. And now let's get into the news. I hope you are all well and in good spirits. Okay, so we are going to start with Mark Rutte from NATO, who has announced that he said, until recently, Russia was producing more ammunition than all NATO allies put together, but not anymore. Across the alliance, we are now opening doors of new production lines and expanding existing ones. We are making more than we have done in decades. Now, I criticize Rutte for actually not having his finger on the pulse. He was talking the last couple of times he's mentioned artillery ammunition production within Europe. He said that, hey, Russia is producing 4 times as much as Europe combined or something like that. And I was like, no, that is definitely not true. He is, I think, conflating Russia building or manufacturing 152 millimeter artillery ammunition, mortar bombs, tank rounds, all these different rounds, and then he's comparing that to Europe's 155 mil ammunition production, and then saying, look, they're producing more. Well, you're comparing apples to bricks. And so I think he's been told now that actually Europe really has sorted themselves out, and they really are producing a lot for Ukraine. I'd be interested to know what the United States is still doing, because they massively ramped up production places like Scranton, Pennsylvania, and they then had a change of government whereby the US government started saying, yeah, not so much. And I wonder how much of their artillery ammunition is finding its way to Ukraine. How much is still orders that were made previously that are still being fulfilled, or whether that's now finished, what the Trump administration is doing with that. Someone was saying today, one of the post-size readings, that the US is doing nothing now in terms of, aid, finances, blah, 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 blah. And, that's obviously not great. But I would like to think there are still some orders that have gone through the USAI, the assistance funding, which is where money is put aside for Ukraine from the US budget to pay for orders from the military industrial complex rather than giving them stockpiles. That's presidential drawdown authority, just to remind people the difference there. Anyway, so that's good news that Rutte seems to be on it. Now we're going to go to, and I don't quite understand this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So the news is that NATO confirms $60 billion Ukraine aid package for 2026, double of country's self-funding capacity. So 4 aid packages have been announced under NATO's PURL initiative for Ukraine, with funding set to reach $60 billion in 2026. Patrick Turner, head of NATO's representation in Ukraine, has said. Now, NATO doesn't fund stuff, okay? So what this has to mean is that NATO member states have committed funding for Ukraine to the tune of this, and they're doing it through NATO's PURL initiative, most of which, but not all, because I believe Sweden were looking at possibly getting PURL funding for, is it for the Gripens, or another country was looking at PURL Pearl funding for equipment going from their nation to Ukraine. So it's not entirely through the United States. But anyway, I presume this is a case of NATO member states ramping up orders. Last year, the allocation was $50 billion. Next year, it will be $60 billion. This is a very large and practical support. And there isn't too much other detail. You know, funding represents half of Ukraine's projected 120 billion defense budget for 2026. Turner explained that the Ukrainian government has informed its partners, including NATO, that it will finance half of the amount domestically, while international partners will cover the remainder. 4 aid packages have already been announced under the Pearl Initiative, prioritize Ukraine requirement list. According to Turner, aid under these packages has either already been provided or is still in the process of arriving in Ukraine, he said. The diplomat said that work continues on organizing and financing subsequent packages, so on and so forth. So, you know, expect more aid to be going. In fact, let's look at some of the details here. So inside the Pearl Initiative, the United States and NATO signed a prioritized Ukraine requirements list agreement on the 14th of July, enabling European countries to purchase American weapons for Ukraine. Although, as I said, I think it isn't just a case of, I think this initiative can be used outside of American purchases. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that under the agreement, Kyiv could receive large quantities of air defense systems, missiles, and ammunition. Denmark allocated approximately 580 million Danish kroner, $84 million through Pearl. Sweden, 275 million. Norway provided 135 million approximately. Then Dutch financed the first aid package under Pearl worth 500 million euros, $541 million. And Germany has also joined the program. The first military equipment under the US-NATO Pearl agreement arrived in Ukraine in September, following a meeting with Rutte on the 24th of September. Zelensky said that Pearl funding reached $2.1 billion within 2 months of the program's creation. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. That's really good. I think at the moment, the US seems to be benefiting the most. Well, Ukraine benefits, obviously, but it appears to be European nations buying stuff off the US. And from an economic point of view, that's obviously good for the US. The EU will transfer $2.3 billion to Ukraine this week, including $1.5 billion under the Ukraine facility and $692 million for delayed armor reform. Around 749 million was withheld over lagging judicial and enforcement digitalization reforms. Ukraine is now until mid-2026 to complete them or lose the funds. So there's pressure from the EU. We heard about this the other day with regard to Ukraine having to reform in certain areas, corruption and digitalization and whatnot. They need to reform in order to get up to the EU standards in order to exceed to the EU. And as a result of them having some challenges in doing some of these reforms during kind of a war, and they were doing really, really well at these, and then they've hit a few speed bumps recently, and that has meant some of the funding hasn't gone to Ukraine as it was hoped to. But now it appears that some of that at least has been rectified, and the funding is flowing again. The EU has approved 1.8 billion euros for Ukraine under long-term funding plan. So I wasn't sure whether this is the same, because there are different figures here used. I don't quite know whether this is the same or not. The Council of the EU has approved November the 4th, the 5th tranche of the Ukraine facility funding. So it does look the same there. Ukraine facility, yeah, they're just different numbers. But then quite often, see, that's 1.8 billion euros, and we're talking dollars there. That's why. Okay, yeah. So that explains that. I now realise. So apologies. Okay. So scrap that. Belgium's refusal to back a multi-billion euro EU loan to Ukraine could prompt the International Monetary Fund to block financial support for Kiev, resulting in cascading loss of confidence in the war-torn country's economic viability, according to Politico. Now, although I've said this about Belgium previously, it's not necessarily Belgium's fault, because they are asking, like I keep saying, for the EU to recognise that there is risk here, and Belgium shouldn't be alone in shouldering that risk just because Euroclear is a Belgium-based entity. And if they're going to use those frozen Russian assets within Euroclear, within Belgium, and within the EU, therefore, to support Ukraine, use those assets wholly to support Ukraine, it shouldn't be up to Belgium to shoulder the responsibility for the risk. European supporters of the controversial 140 billion euro reparations loan backed by Russian state assets frozen in the EU argue that the IMF's continued support of Ukraine is crucial, and fear time is running out to convince the institution to grant new loans to Kiev. So the problem here is that there is another funding stream that comes from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, but that is contingent upon frozen Russian assets going, because I presume in that case, there's much more liquidity in the Ukrainian system, and in order for them to, I don't know, I'm kind of speculating here, but in order for the IMF to be justified in giving money to Ukraine, it needs to be the case that frozen Russian assets have been released for Ukraine as well. And if those are held up, the idea here is that if Belgium holds up the EU frozen Russian assets funding, then that will in turn have a knock-on effect of stopping IMF funding going to Ukraine, to the tune of quite a bit. So one European Commission official said, and diplomats from 3 member countries said that securing such an agreement will convince the IMF that Ukraine is financially viable for the coming years. So if they get that, then Ukraine's not going to fall apart completely financially, and therefore the IMF has got less of a risk and is more willing to loan them the money that is going to come from the IMF, right? A requirement for the Washington-based institution to bankroll any country. So it is really important that the Belgian situation is sorted out. As Eurominded Press here says, as Ukraine's budget gap widens, Belgium's Prime Minister De Wever blocks 140 billion euro in EU aid. But again, it's not to blame Belgium here necessarily, citing fears of legal liability over the 193 billion euros in frozen Russian assets. What looks like caution could cost Kiev the funds it needs to survive 2026. So yeah, that really needs to be cleared up, and the EU needs to kind of sort that out. Now, Norway has been urged to tap into 1.8 trillion euros worth of sovereign wealth fund to help the EU unlock Ukraine loan. So after a Danish newspaper revived a once far-fetched proposal, the idea has since gained traction among Norwegian parties. So calls are mounting for Norway to use its 1.8 trillion euro sovereign wealth fund to help move forward the EU's stalled 140 billion euro loan for Ukraine, after a Danish newspaper, as mentioned, revived that proposal. 5 Norwegian political parties have now urged Oslo to step in to overcome Belgium's concerns about using the mobilized Russian sovereign assets to fund a 140 billion euro reparation loan to Kiev. Now, this is so if we hear the fund is the largest in the world. Yeah, here it is. And it's swelled by 109 billion euros from gas profits after Russia's invasion. Norway know this. They're very aware that their sovereign wealth fund has been topped up very nicely. Thank you very much. It's already like the largest such fund in the world. And it's been top. And essentially what happened is, way back when, this is probably a very simplistic understanding, but way back when North Sea oil and I presume gas was found, Norway had a very different approach to the UK. The UK went down a free market approach, which, if you're into free market economics and you think, right, the markets need to sort everything out, the government can sod off, then, okay, brilliant. You're a free marketeer and you don't want any government involvement and the market should arbitrate everything. However, Norway said, so what the UK said is, Shell, BP, you can go for it, and occasionally we'll tax you a little bit, but you can just go and help yourself to all of the oil and gas in UK waters. And Norway said, you guys, whatever oil company is, if you're going to have a go at drilling in Norwegian sovereign territory, actually, we're going to take a big cut of that. Thank you very much, because that's Norwegian resources, and it's owned by the Norwegian people, if you like, and it's not owned by BP and Shell and whoever it is. So if you're going to drill in Norway, we're going to have X amount from that, from what you make off that. And that then started going into sovereign wealth fund, which did very, very well. Thank you very much. And there's probably other aspects to this, but it has been built up into an incredibly large amount of money, which then funds like Norwegian pensions and all sorts. And Britain's there going, hang on, we should have done that. It's like, oh no, free market economics. Oh, Milton Friedman. Oh, Von Hayek. Mises. You're like, really? Okay. Well, so Norway's now seen as like one of the richest countries on earth, effectively, but it's got this massive sovereign wealth fund. And of course, with the start of the war, or this iteration of the war, with the change in oil and gas prices that were driven largely by Russia invading Ukraine, Norway's sovereign wealth fund has been absolutely creaming it in. And so this is why the Norwegians kind of uniquely have been in a position to be able to help Ukraine massively. We're going to return to that. But there's this idea that actually you guys have got the ability maybe to underwrite the risk of reparations loans. I don't know what the Danish newspaper and the Norwegian parties have suggested, but I imagine it would be something along the lines of, well, look, if we could underwrite the risk of the reparations loan going from Euroclear to Ukraine, and if there's something goes wrong, then do you know what, we've got quite a big pot that we can draw from. It sounds to me like that might be one of the prevailing ideas there. So now, we'll come back to Norway in some time, because they are actually, helping out Ukraine to significant degrees with massive pledges year on year. But anyway, unspent funds from government ministries in 2025, ad hoc government borrowing, and front-loading loans whose disbursements are currently scheduled throughout 2026 could contribute to a buffer early next year, a top Ukrainian official told the Kyiv Independent. So actually, they could stretch their finances a little bit if Brussels does drag their feet, but essentially that massive amount of money in the form of a huge EU loan would be very, very nice. Thank you very much. Viggo Holmson, read my comments under that article. Okay. What, on Blue Sky? Okay, Viggo, thank you. I mean, this is great. This is how community works, isn't it? Okay, let's see. Oh, Viggo, there you go, on Blue Sky. So let's see what Viggo has to say, so he doesn't have to write it in a live thread. So Viggo, who lives in that neck of the woods, says it is very unlikely the Norwegian pension fund Global will be used in this manner. The fund is independently and apolitically managed by the Norwegian Central Bank, not subject to political whims of Parliament, according to statutes set up some 30 years ago. It is not to be used to accomplish political objectives, but to safeguard Norway's economic future and function as an economic stabilizer during economic turmoil. I wonder if there could be an argument that helping out Ukraine is securing Norway's economic future. That could be a little loophole. There is an independent ethics board charged with making sure investments are ethically sound, but its work is currently on hold pending revision of its statutes. Thank you very much for adding that context, Mr. Holmson. You are an absolute legend. Okay, we're all about accurate information here and taking learned opinions from all over the shop. UK, we already talked ad infinitum ad nauseum about Storm Shadows, right? So the UK and France have revitalized the production of Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles. That was announced in July, and it appears that Ukraine are receiving a quote normal amount of, well, Zelensky said that Ukraine was firing a quote normal amount of Storm Shadows. Implication being that regularly they use Storm Shadows. Now, there were cruise missiles used last night to hit the Donetsk Shahed ammunition facility. I was reading earlier that someone was saying that they had been looking at satellite imagery over the last few months, and it was clear that they were using this place by Donetsk to store Shahed drones and warheads, but and therefore, you know, Ukraine would have known about this. But it looks like the speculation, I can't remember who it was it Michael Weiss or someone, saying that it looks like the Ukrainians were waiting until it was properly filled. So they've been, you know, seeing there being lots of activity around this Shahed depot, and then over months they didn't hit it, waited for the perfect moment, and then kaboom, you had 1,000 drones and 1,500 warheads there that have now gone bye-byes. But the understanding was that was cruise missiles and drones. We've seen drone footage. They've now released drone footage. Shall I show you that now? I was going to do a separate video on this, but they have released drone footage of the strikes on that Donetsk facility. And here it is, this one. Oh no, that's all looks even. Sumy region. No, where are you? I know you're here. No, that's the same one. Anyway, I'm glad I said I would find this. You can just see me scrolling through. Right, here it is. So these are the drones hitting the Donetsk facility last night. And this is kind of relevant to the military aid video, because the interest here is, what are these drones? They've used supposedly missiles and drones. Yeah, this is a drone's eye view. Quite interesting to see potentially how difficult it is to steer some of these things. They're obviously larger drones, but they do have that kind of FPV quality to them. There, I don't know what that's hitting. That might be the very first one that hits then. And you've got other drones in the air that are following suit. And then one of these final drones, is it this one? It sort of cuts out there. I think it shows how it's difficult to hit or difficult to steer these, particularly in the terminal phase there, because it looks like, oh no, it's not that one. That one goes straight in the middle, which I also find interesting, because they are flying them directly into where there's already big flames. And so there's repeated drones being sent at the same point. Now it's this one. This is the last one. And you can see it goes off to the side there. And there must be quite difficult to, I don't know whether there's a lag in controlling these, but that one looks like that's going to miss. And in fact, we hear that 90% of the drones hit, which is to say that 10% obviously missed, but they might have been intercepted, they might have been shot down. But anyway, we have there what we talk about, cruise missiles. So I don't know whether they sent cruise. The claim was that missiles and drones were sent. Would that be a good use of Storm Shadow cruise missiles? Would that be how you can guarantee getting into, I don't know, bunkers? Were there bunkers there? Or how were these stored? This is supposedly at the airport, which is just by, if you remember when Avdiivka was being attacked, and I was mapping Avdiivka on a daily basis, there was an airport just, it was Vasily, wasn't it? And what the little villages, anyway, just northwest of Donetsk is an airport that was kind of the front line for ages. And then when eventually Avdiivka fell, that airport then went, I guess, into the Russian hands. And that's where they've been storing these Shahed drones to use them and create their launch facilities there as well. And they've been using Shaheds against the front lines too. So although I said this morning that might not have an effect on logistics, frontline logistics, because some people are saying, well, they've hit a massive Donetsk ammunition depot. So that will affect frontline troops' access to ammunition and supplies and whatnot in, say, the Pokrovsk area. And I said, actually, no, because it's Shaheds. But actually, they have been firing Shaheds at the contact line as well as using them deep into Ukraine. So it might have some effect on the front line. Anyway, UK ramping up production of Storm Shadows. Wasn't made public. The shipment wasn't made public, but it's reportedly meant to prepare Kiev for the winter, when Moscow may further intensify attacks on civilians. So last night we also saw attacks on thermal power plant, an oil depot, and then oil depots in Crimea, and also a refinery. So thermal power plant and a refinery. So all of those targets within Russia, Volgograd and elsewhere, are prime targets for, I guess, cruise missiles. So you might have seen, but then it depends how far away they were, because supposedly the Storm Shadow cruise missiles are sort of 300-kilometer range, because they're not supposed to be exporting ones that go beyond the stipulated range for missile exports, which is 300 kilometers. But actually, the Storm Shadows should be able to get 500 kilometers plus range. So I'd like to think that the UK has slipped Ukraine some long range Storm Shadows. Right, now on the UK, they're ramping up air defense aid for Ukraine, and they're backing a new Octopus interceptor drone program, as I've talked about previously. Thousands of these drones and hundreds of missiles will be delivered to help defend Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure from Russia's winter attacks, reported Euromaidan press. So UK still in the zone with providing an awful lot of really important kit for Ukraine, as well as Germany. So, and it's interesting here, the UK and Germany have ordered new mobile floating bridges to replace older M3 amphibious rigs, potentially freeing them for Ukraine. The bridges will join the 130th UK-German multinational bridge battalion in Minden, enhancing NATO interoperability. I said in my last military aid update that I think that Britain and Germany are doing similar things, because both of our economies have been in trouble. Ours is particularly in trouble. Germany's has basically been stagnating for the last 5 years. And both countries know very much. In fact, I really do rate what Germany and Britain are doing at the moment. Not just from me being British, but I know the decisions being made, very difficult decisions in what is, like, if you're looking at British press at the moment, our economy is in trouble, and our books are not balanced, and the Chancellor's Exchequer has an absolute nightmare. It looks like taxes are going to go up, which is against their manifesto promise, but doesn't look like there's any other option, so on and so forth. But Britain also knows that Ukraine needs to be supported, so we need to find money from somewhere to support Ukraine. And we are still, we're ramping up the production of cruise missiles, we're restarting it, and we're getting all sorts of other missiles to Ukraine, air defense missiles to Ukraine, and lots of other kit. And I think that we are trying to stimulate our economy using the military industrial complex to do so. And I think Germany's doing the same. This is my speculation. And I think Germany has said that they want Germany, and it looks like they're really trying to do this, Germany to be the military leader in Europe. And they've got over the kind of post-World War II, we don't want to be seen to be too militaristic, or we've got a really uncomfortable past. I think they've got past that now. They've changed their funding rules, so they can do a lot more borrowing to support the military industrial complex and support the Bundeswehr, and to support Ukraine. And so I think they're stimulating their economy through these sorts of means. And actually, Germany and UK are also working much closer on defense pacts. And here is an interesting one that seems to be aligned to that, which is, hey, we're going to build a bunch of these. We're going to order a whole load new floating bridges, and then we can get the old ones to Ukraine. But this will also stimulate the economy, possibly. I think it might be all connected. Defense Secretary John Healey for the UK has confirmed that work on the joint UK-German. So again, we've just seen UK-German unit working together on bridges and NATO interoperability. Now we've got a 2,000-kilometer deep precision strike missile that's being developed between the British and the Germans is speeding up, describing it as one of several major milestones under the Trinity House Defence Agreement. So this, I presume, is that agreement, the aforementioned agreement between the Germans and the British that's been done, I think, since the present government came in. So they are trying to do an awful lot, the British, I think, at the moment, with regard to reform to the armed services, funding the armed services correctly, but also knowing that, well, if we want to put 2 billion, I think, into like housing for armed services as well. It's like, you know, to a degree, there's going to be this threat of robbing Peter to pay Paul, that actually, you know, there's no money, and how are we going to afford supporting Ukraine, upgrading and reforming the armed services, and also, you know, paying for hospitals and schools and whatnot. So all very challenging. But yeah, now staying on Germany, they plan to boost military aid to Ukraine by 3 billion in 2026. That's 3 billion euros. Oh God, you don't get me. You know, there's conversation in a live chat that I just want to jump on. So anyway, Germany plans to boost military aid to Ukraine by 3 billion euros in 2026, raising the total to 8.5 billion euros. So this is something they keep doing, which is announcing that they're going to spend this much support in Ukraine, and everyone going, "Oh, that's not enough. That's way less than last year." And then people, analysts like German Aid to Ukraine, point out that and last year they also said that they would pledge less, and then throughout the year they add more and more and more until, you know, they're beating the year before. So, you know, don't worry. Hold your horses. Handelsblatt has reported funds will go towards artillery shells, infantry fighting vehicles, drones, vehicles, and Patriot missiles. However, Taurus cruise missiles remain excluded. The final 2026 budget is expected by next week. So that's good. Germany helping out there. As mentioned, Germany will add 3 billion euros, bringing the 2026 total to 11.5 billion for artillery, drones, and 2 Patriot system replacements, which is somewhat different. The reason I put that there is because that's somewhat different. It says raising the total to 8.5 here, but I think the idea here is it raises it from 8.5 to 11.5. So there's a discrepancy between these two sources. No reports on Euromonitor Press. One of them's at least one of them may be wrong. The increase keeps Germany as Europe's largest military backer, second only to the US globally. And the US gave an awful lot, of course, now no longer doing so. But again, you know, the US has a much bigger population than Germany, much bigger economy, much bigger GDP. And so, you know, we need to understand total amounts, even with Germany. So as kind as Germany are being, and as robust as Germany are being in supporting Ukraine, they're still not doing in proportionally as much as, say, you know, the Nordic and Baltic nations, I would have thought. So we need to understand these figures more accurately. Germany, so we said we will continue our support for as long as necessary, those classic words again, to defend against Russia's war of aggression. And that is the spokesman for the Ministry of Finance. So that's good news. Germany really continuing to step up, staying stepped up. Now, German aid to Ukraine says some very good initial news. The German Handelsblatt reports, citing the government sources. Okay, so here it is. Another 3 billion, taking it to, this is the correct. German aid to Ukraine is your man. So 11.5 or 12 billion euros is actually the total. So that's where it is. Final figure will likely be lower, not higher, as the Ministry of Finance has shown in recent years. And just a few weeks ago, that it is always ready to cut back on Ministry of Defence increase plans. The negotiations are scheduled to be concluded as early as next week. The planned increase is likely related to the Bild report published in mid-September, stating that MOD had requested a total of around 10.6 billion euros in additional aid for Ukraine in the years 2026 and 2027, which was initially rejected, but now appears to be on course. But it does not include it does not include Taurus, unfortunately. It's still ruled out. Now, Rheinmetall, the plant, I don't know which one, they've got a number, and it could even mean one in Hungary. So I think that's where they make the links, isn't it? But anyway, Rheinmetall plant is completing the assembly of a batch of Lynx combat vehicles. So these infantry fighting vehicles that are supposedly going to be built at some point in Ukraine. Now they were sent a not a prototype, but like a testing version. I think back in 2024, the end of 2024, and I believe they had to go back not to the drawing board, but they had to go back and tinker with it. But the company's CEO intimates that a whole batch of Lynx combat vehicles will soon be sent to Ukraine. The first Lynx was delivered to Ukraine this winter for testing. No, I think it was last winter, actually. Right, German aid to Ukraine then says, okay, a small but important update on the subject of Lynx infantry fighting vehicles and Ukraine. Rheinmetall CEO Paprika has announced in an interview with Loyal magazine published yesterday that funding for production in Ukraine is still missing and a corresponding contract has not yet been signed. This is often the problem, is that there's potential to build this stuff, but the funding's not there. Building a factory in Ukraine would only make sense if at least 200 to 300 vehicles were to be built there. According to Paprika, Rheinmetall is currently building 5 Lynx infantry fighting vehicles in Germany for Ukraine. So it's in the German production facility. These are most likely still test vehicles, as it was originally announced to supply 10 of them to Ukraine, but that's it. Upon inquiry, I was told that the interview was conducted 2 weeks ago. So around the same time when many accounts were widely announcing that Ukraine had chosen the Lynx. Just to put things into perspective regarding the actual and current status of the project, seems like things are slowly moving. Agreement on defence industrial cooperation signed mid-October, which facilitates the development of joint industrial projects like manufacturing Lynx infantry fighting vehicles in Ukraine. However, the whole project still seems far from being finalised. In other words, Ukraine still lacks an investor willing to put a few billion euros on the table for the production of German infantry fighting vehicles in Ukraine, and unless one is found, things likely won't move forward. In other words, don't get your hopes up too much. This one seems to be rumbling on, rather like that Lynx there. And I would say that it would be absolutely fantastic if Ukraine does have the ability to build its own infantry fighting vehicles, so they are not dependent so much on other nations. They are missing that kind of production and tank production in Ukraine. Right, no reports that Ukraine has kicked off a working visit to Norway the other day with a meeting between the Ukrainian and Norwegian defense ministers. Norway pledged $7 billion in 2026 for defense aid and reaffirmed its support for Ukraine's air defense, aviation, and long-range strike capabilities. So Norway coming up with the goods. They really are. I guess there are some people that might say, but you can do more. All nations could definitely do more. And Norway are definitely doing a damned good job there. Okay. Italy is preparing its 12th military aid package, which I'd mentioned previously, for Ukraine, according to the Ministry of Defense. Bloomberg previously reported the shipment will include ammunition and missiles for the SAMP-T air defense system, with deliveries expected by the end of 2025. Now, this allows me to segue into the next piece. Next post. I still do wonder why there aren't more SAMP-Ts that have gone to Ukraine, especially since, this is Europe's chance to say, hey, we produce something that's analogous to the Patriots, and you guys should buy this and not the bloody Patriot, which is kind of what Denmark's position has been. Now, French Aid to Ukraine reports today that according to the Chief of Defense Staff of the French Armed Forces, the Franco-Italian SAMP-T systems deployed in Ukraine are capable of intercepting upgraded Russian attacks, a task with which the US Patriot systems are struggling. He therefore concluded that the SAMP-T outperforms the Patriot. Now, that is a huge claim. It might be to do with the latest missile tinkerings that the Russians have carried out, so that the Patriots are struggling more with the ballistic missile attacks that are coming their way. But I don't know how accurate this is. I mean, it's what the French are saying, but that is a pretty bold call. Now, they have 2 of these systems. Why don't they, if they are this good, why don't they have more? Now, some claims were that the bottleneck was in the Aster 30 missile production. That's a missile that is fired from the SAMP-T. You've got the new SAMP-T NG, which is the upgraded version that is out imminently, or already is out, that I think has better anti-ballistic missile takedown capabilities. We'll see. So military aid to Ukraine, Jeff 2146, this Belgian chappie, has a list of stuff that goes to different countries. He has said that there are an unknown number of Puma 4x4 armored personnel carriers have gone to Ukraine, and that's evidenced by them actually, being on the back of a truck going on their way to Ukraine. So it looks like the Italians, who don't seem to announce their aid packages like other countries have. In fact, Germany doesn't anymore. They're a lot quieter. They don't announce it like they used to. But that's really good news. So we already know the Italians are getting a whole load of older Centauro B1, kind of these light wheeled tanks, and a load of older M113 looking variants. But it could also be that they've delivered a bunch of Pumas as well. Now, Latvia is to transfer 21 more Patriot armored personnel vehicles to Ukraine. The transfer will take place tomorrow, which is today, at an event with the participation of Ukrainian Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal. So these look pretty capable 8x8 APCs with some kind of armament. I don't know what the variant the Ukrainians are receiving is, but they now have, I think, the full complement of the ones that they were promised. Is that correct? I'd be interested to see if any more of these could go. These are Patriots that are made in Latvia. Here we go. Ukraine's Defense Minister Shmyhal announced that Ukraine has received 21 Patriot APCs 6x6, actually not the 8x8, 6x6 armored personnel. That means all 6 wheels drive, armored personnel carriers from Latvia. These vehicles will be deployed with the Special Operations Forces. In total, by 2025, Ukraine has received all the 42 promised armored vehicles. So they've got 42 of these bad boys. They look pretty sizable. They look pretty decent. I assume these are the ones they're getting. So they do have, at least these couple, have some armaments on top. It looks like all of those are the same. So some kind of heavy machine gun on top there. Denis Shmyhal, obviously welcoming those. That's fantastic. Right. Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine, Kozenko, has met with the Dutch Ministry of Defense delegation led by Lieutenant General André Steur to discuss strengthening Ukraine's air capabilities. Over 300 Ukrainian aviation specialists have already been trained in the Netherlands, with 10 more to follow by year's end. Now, I don't know what aviation specialist means in terms of, it's suitably vague. I presume that's not just pilots, that they've trained 300 pilots. Netherlands has helped with that. It's probably more likely that this is maintenance, or it could be a mix, because we know that the UK and France, and then so it used to be that, was it Denmark was training F-16 pilots, but then that got passed on to Romania, and I know Czechia is involved in aviation as well. So I don't know if it's pilots or maintenance personnel, but super important. You can't fly a plane if you don't have a pilot, but you can't fly a plane if you can't maintain it. So these are equally important contingent components for flying. 10 more to follow by the year's end, whoever they may be. Now, Chris Owicki has a thread here saying Russian war bloggers are bitter and outraged that Serbia is selling ammunition to the EU to provide to Ukraine. One advocates that, in response, quote, as a brotherly gesture, we should cut off their effing gas valve. So there's a real anger that Serbia is going behind Russia's back and selling equipment to Ukraine. That's exactly what Slovakia is doing. And I did a video on this the other day. Ramzai, this war blogger, complains, quote, Serbia is ready to sell ammunition to the EU, even if it ends up in Ukraine, because the warehouses are overflowing. That says Vucic. That's what Vucic says. Vucic emphasized that Serbia is militarily neutral, but is ready to cooperate with European armies. Brothers, they are. So the warehouses are overflowing with shells. Cash is frozen. So let it fly at the Russians. They are brothers. There are plenty of them. They will tolerate it. And Serbia has the money. Vucic is as disgusting as a caterpillar gorged on cabbage. Interesting metaphor there. Or simile, I should say. Two majors and other channels is equally unhappy. This might be a cunning plan to infiltrate a double agent into the enemy's lair, but Serbian shells are quite likely to hit Russian military and civilians. Moreover, financial and humanitarian aid prolongs Ukraine's senseless resistance no less than shells and equipment. We could, as a brotherly gesture, cut off their effing gas valve to stop the production of shells for our enemies, so on and so forth. So people are not happy with what Serbia is doing. Serbia, on the other hand, are making probably a pretty penny. South Korea has found a clever way to around its arms export ban to help Ukraine. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, Poland has a huge set of orders coming from South Korea. Poland seemed to be splashing the cash, have been for some years in terms of military equipment. They've gone to South Korea to do these deals where there's joint production of whatever it is, the tank, where the first 100, I'm making up these numbers, but it's something like first 100 are built in South Korea, and then each one thereafter can be built in Poland under license, but South Korea obviously gets cut in that. Now, Poland has been ramping up buying South Korean stuff and American stuff, but here the claim is that Poland's $14 billion tank deal created an indirect pipeline other allies can replicate. Every time North Korea deepens its support for Russia's war in Ukraine, South Korea promises to reconsider arming Kyiv directly. The announcements come with stern language about crossing red lines, and then nothing happens. But focusing on what Seoul isn't doing misses what it has accomplished, pioneering an indirect support model that's proven both scalable and sustainable. Through systematic defense exports to Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states, South Korea has enabled equipment transfers to Ukraine while navigating legal constraints and diplomatic sensitivities. This approach offers a blueprint other nations facing similar restrictions could replicate. South Korea has rapidly become one of the world's major arms exporters. Military hardware like K2 Black Panther, main battle tanks, K9 Thunder, self-propelled howitzers, and the Chunmoo multiple launch rocket system have become bestsellers. The $13.7 billion deal that Poland signed with South Korea in 2022 marked the country's arrival as a global defense supplier, not just a regional one. For Kyiv, such a trajectory carries important implications. So every time these countries receive their South Korean kit, it allows those countries to then get their older existing tanks to Ukraine. So, Poland began transferring Soviet-era T-72 tanks to Ukraine in 2022, with over 200 donated by some accounts in the early phase of the war. In August 2022, Warsaw signed an executive contract to acquire 180 South Korean K2 Black Panther tanks, with the first deliveries arriving in December 2022. The rapid procurement of modern replacements appears to have enabled Poland to donate large portions of its older T-72 inventory during 2022 to 2023. And the same pattern applied to artillery. South Korean K9 howitzer deliveries freed Warsaw to transfer crabbed self-propelled howitzers platforms based on the K9 design to Kyiv. So, officials will deny this, and South Korea are being very, very careful not to get themselves into trouble. But it looks like this is a way to get around controversial weaponry getting controversially to Ukraine. Okay, we're now going to move on to Ukrainian indigenous stuff. I'm just going to take a bit of a break and say hello to you guys, because my brain probably needs a break. Dave Ox, thank you very much. Have a pint, mate. I really appreciate that. Do you know what I could do with a pint, actually? No, I could do with a cup of tea. I have a pint tonight. At home, of course. Finnish guy, Russia delenda est. Go and learn your Latin if you don't know what he's saying, but I agree. Zeb Carter gives 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, Zeb. Legend. And a super sticker from Noel Grace. Thank you, Noel Grace 99. Appreciate that, buddy. I appreciate your kindness really very much. So I hope you are all well in the live chat. Yeah, North Koreans on their way to Ukraine, unfortunately, and that is a challenge. Like I keep saying, there is this asymmetry. We're going to talk about that in a little bit just after this section. Okay, let's go on to Ukrainian indigenous production and what not. Ukraine is to open defense production offices in Berlin and Copenhagen this year, says Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukraine is set to open defense production offices in those two cities by year's end as Kyiv seeks to boost its weapons exports. Interesting. So that's about exports rather than localizing production abroad. It's probably about both, isn't it? If they can sell weapons that they can build above the rate that they need to use in Ukraine, and then those excess weapons can be used to fund other things, maybe purchases of other weapons from other nations. Zelensky's confirmed Ukraine is already using new domestically produced missiles named the Flamingo and the Ruta missile. Oh, the Rutte missile. We haven't heard anything about this, or I haven't talked to you about this missile. With mass production expected by the end of the year, he also mentioned expanded production of various Neptune missile types and missile drones like the Patriots and the Peklo. So these are the kind of the long and the normal ranged Neptune missiles. Neptune D, I think, is one. So what is this Rutte missile? Well, here is United 24 saying Ukraine's new Rutte missile outsmarts GPS jamming with Spanish tech. I believe the Dutch might have something to do with this as well. The Ukrainian-developed Rutte missile is equipped with a high-precision guidance system based on Spanish technology, according to Infodefensa on November the 1st. The system is designed to maintain accuracy even under conditions of signal jamming and spoofing. According to Infodefensa, the navigation system integrated into the Rutte missile was developed by UAV Navigation, a subsidiary of the Spanish defense technology group OSEA. The company is responsible for the design, integration, and testing of the CNG compass, navigation, and guidance system used in the missile. The Rutte missile has demonstrated its performance in real-world combat scenarios, including operations in environments with disrupted satellite signals. The Spanish-developed CNG system enables the missile to operate autonomously, carry out target acquisition, and perform terminal optical guidance in GNSS-denied zones. The missile is also capable of participating in coordinated swarm operations, allowing multiple units to carry out synchronized maneuvers to bypass enemy air defenses. According to the manufacturer, Rutte can adapt to changing battlefield conditions and integrate with existing Ukrainian command platforms. It's a cruise missile developed by Destinus, a European aerospace company with facilities in Spain and Switzerland. I have a feeling Destinus is Dutch, though. Known for its work with hypersonic research, Destinus presented the missile at the Eurosatory 2024 Defense Exhibition in France, where it was displayed with Ukrainian national symbols. Unlike traditional long-range weapons, Rutte blends characteristics of a drone and a missile. So we're seeing a number of these drone missiles, the Peklo, the Patriots. If it features an internal combustion engine for long-range propulsion and is believed to have stealth elements that reduce its radar cross-section, the missile can navigate complex flight paths at low altitude, making it suitable for contested environments. While detailed specs remain classified, open source analysis suggests Rutte has a modular architecture and may support various payloads, including anti-ship and land attack configurations. So there you go. That sounds good. Indeed, Copilot, the AI here for Microsoft Edge, says the Rutte missile is a Ukrainian cruise missile developed by the Dutch startup Destinus, so it is Dutch. It features, well, at least according to this, it features a high-precision guidance system based on Spanish technology, and that's what we have looked at. Okay, so that's good news. There's another missile we can add to the inventory of Ukrainian weaponry. Okay, now let's go on to another one. ICTV has showcased a new Ukrainian AI-powered drone to intercept Shaheds up to 100 kilometers away, costing $5,000 to $10,000, so considerably less than the thing that it's shooting down. They use radar and auto-targeting, also featured FPV drones with gun cartridge barrels and AI aiming, used in Kharkiv and Donetsk. So a number of things have been highlighted here by ICTV in this video, but the main one there looks to be this 100-kilometer range interceptor drone for Shaheds. And that's pretty decent to have radar on auto targeting, and to cost a fairly fairly reasonable amount. Now, by the end of November, Ukraine aims to produce 600 to 800 interceptor drones per day. Zelensky has said the goal remains 1,000 daily. Current targets reflect ongoing challenges, including Russian strikes on infrastructure and defense production sites. I've talked about this previously, how Zelensky here has admitted that Russia has been successful in striking Ukrainian military industrial defense facilities. One of the ones that they're producing is Sting, and this is the Wild Hornets version of an interceptor drone. So after a year of work, Ukraine's Wild Hornets team built Sting, a fast, nimble drone designed to intercept Shahids. In just 4 months of production, it's already taken down 1,000 drones. So Sting itself supposedly is responsible for 250 Shahids getting taken out a week, nearly half in October alone. Sting is quick to deploy, easy to use. 250 a month. Sorry. Although half of them were in October alone. So actually, I would assume that they're going to be, taking out pretty significant numbers of Russian drones per day, really, per week, per month. Sting is quick to deploy, easy to use, and built for mass production. It's exactly what we like to hear. Now we're going to talk about Mavic drones, and the first 1,000 Ukrainian Mavics went to the front line. This is a piece in Militiani, where we hear that Ukrainian industry has begun supplying the military with reconnaissance drones designed as a domestic analog of the Chinese DJI Mavic. So the problem for the Ukrainians is that Russia is clamping down on exports of Chinese drone components and Chinese drones. Russians are having some trouble as well, but really this is a much bigger issue for the Ukrainians because China appears to be very much aligned with Russia and is making it harder and harder for the Ukrainians to get access to really important drone equipment. Now, I've talked previously with, I think, Bogdan from Drone Lab, and I think Dimko as well. Dimko Zhluktenko, who is a drone operator, and he runs Zigger's Paw as a Ukrainian, essentially drone and equipment, electronic warfare and all sorts, charity. Now, there was only, as far as I understood, one Ukrainian drone that was made entirely in Ukraine. I don't know if that's changed, and it could be this one they're talking about. But First Deputy Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov announced that during the Defense Tech Valley conference, quote, one investor created a Ukrainian Mavic, and we have already delivered the first 1,000 to the battlefield. So that's absolutely brilliant. He noted that the drone is not fully Ukrainian made due to either the level of component localization or the use of foreign made parts. Okay, so it's not a 100% Ukrainian made drone, but I think there is one that is, and that's what I've been led to believe. So this is obviously a different one. Although compared directly with the Chinese DJI Mavic, the new drone has a longer flight range and a larger payload, suggesting it can also carry out strike missions using free fall munitions. And the introduction of Ukrainian drones in this category is significant as they are used in frontline short-range reconnaissance and support for assault troops. Their compact size and ease of use make them accessible not only to unmanned system specialists, but also the regular infantry. Until February to March of this year, the Mavic was primarily used to target infantry with drops. Now we are seeing more impact from FPV drones, Fedorov added. However, frontline reconnaissance demand still exceeds supply. A batch of 1,000 drones can meet the monthly needs of a single infantry or mechanized brigade, while total requirements for the defense forces likely number in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. So that's really that's a massive need, isn't it? But it looks like the Ukrainians have started. We'll just finish this off. State interest in replacing Chinese drones, which have played a strategic role in the conflict, emerged last year. This effort included events showcasing proposals from Ukrainian manufacturers. Miliciani correspondents visited one such event where 8 Ukrainian companies presented prototypes, and it names all those companies. By the end of the year, 4 had passed testing and were codified by the MOD. The developers offered solutions integrating Ukrainian-made components, including both simple mechanical parts and advanced electronics such as digital communication systems. So that's really good. The more that Ukraine can stand on its own 2 feet, not only with things like missiles like the Ruta missile, although it is using components from abroad, that missile, and you've got the Flamingo, FP2 drones as well. Peklo, Palencia, the more they can do that, the better. But even if they can start producing significant numbers of FPV drones and Mavic style drones, then that's really good news. Now, moving from UAVs, aerial vehicles, to UGVs, ground vehicles, unmanned versions, the 1st Separate Medical Battalion conducted a unique operation, as I reported the other day, to evacuate a wounded man using an IRC with an armored capsule. So this is an unmanned ground vehicle. I don't know what IRC stands for. During the route to the wounded man, the IRC was blown up by an anti-personnel mine, but was able to continue moving on a damaged wheel. And while returning to the transfer point, it was attacked by a Russian drone, but the wounded man was not injured thanks to the armored capsule. And this is the amazing part. So not only does it have an armored capsule that has kept the Ukrainian soldiers safe, but the total length of the route was 64 kilometers, of which 37 kilometers was carried out with a damaged wheel. So this is phenomenal. The range on that is very, very impressive. And to be able to withstand all sorts of barrages from the Russians is a really, really good sign. Okay, Ukrainian FPV drone decoys. This is not something I'd seen before, but these appear to be FPV or Mavic style drone launch platforms equipped with an FPV on top. It's not a UGV drone decoy, but it's interesting that they're even finding the need to design and manufacture these sorts of decoys as well. I find that quite incredible. So Mark, so that's the end of the Ukrainian section. We're going to go into the Russian section in a wee while. Just got a bit Mark Bizq in the house. Julian Roster, thank you for joining, my friend. Gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you. Wizard of Ooze, Grammarly app just tried to get me to end my message with thanks for your attention to this matter. At least it didn't suggest I do it in all caps. I love Grammarly. You can get a free Grammarly if you work on Word, right? Microsoft Word. There's an add-on for Microsoft Word as well that you can get, which is really, really worth it if you do a lot of work on Word. But Grammarly is an absolute lifesaver for me. I do so many typos because one of the things about multiple sclerosis is that I can't feel my fingers. It means, like, for example, you see this pin here, and I did it myself yesterday. Oh, well done me. Just put the pin through my jumper and then attach it back to it. I had to kneel down to do it because I do a lot of stuff kneeling because my legs aren't very good. And it took me probably 10 minutes to do that. I mean, 10 full minutes. Dropping it, can't feel it. Then I had to like lift it all up, and then it just took forever. Like a simple thing like that for me is just frustratingly difficult. It's why I don't do as much DIY as I used to, just because I can't. If I'm trying to. The other day we got one of these plastic like Keter boxes for the garden to keep some stuff in, and we put it together, me and my partner. And it's a point where, like, hey, I'm the man. I'm supposed to do, so to speak, the screwing here. Because that's the gender role, right? That we've received, and I can't. If I try and hold a screw in place, I can't feel my fingers. There's no feedback loop. I just drop it, or can't do it, or it's all over the shop. And then Helen's like, "Oh, just give it to me, I'll do it." And then she ends up screwing everything in. I'm just, put it there. I'm just directing. Yeah, one there, one over there. Oh, well done. I just delegate my workforce now. Yeah. So what am I talking about? What? Oh, yes. So yeah, random. So Grammarly is really useful because I do so many typos. It then just underlines everything and says you spelled this wrong, you spelled that wrong, and you can use it all over whatever browsers you're using, and you can get the Grammarly add-on for Chrome, for Edge, blah blah blah. Anyway, thanks, Wizard. Da Vinci, Destinus is founded by anti-war Russian Kokorich, living in Switzerland. Destinus is in 5 EU countries. Thank you for that information, Da Vinci. What a total legend you are. Thank you, matey. And Mark Biscu, after your procedure this week, for those who don't know, how do you not know? I've mentioned it enough times. I had my legs up in stirrups having a prostate biopsy yesterday, which I'm going to send away to have a look, have a little look at. After your procedure this week, I guess one could say that Ukrainians are literally all up in your business lately. So, and for those who don't know, it happens that I think the urologist who was helping the surgeon rummage around, she was Ukrainian. So we were talking about the Ukrainian war whilst things were happening. Whilst I had my feet up in stirrups, quite the sight. Towards a bottle of wine from us. Cheers, mate. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Olena. You take care. I really appreciate that. Thank you. So, going on to Russian equipment and aid, and the aid is coming thick and fast from North Korea. They have already given many personnel and bits of equipment to Ukraine. Now we hear, as I've mentioned to you several times, that North Korea is sending 5,000 construction troops. Yeah, sure. To Russia, and they've done that since September for infrastructure reconstruction, according to South Korean intelligence reporting. The deployment adds to the, as Euromodern Press here says, 10,000. Previously, we had heard 14,000 North Koreans, 2,000 of whom are dead, according to South Korean intelligence. Although it says here 10,000 North Korean personnel and 600 have already been killed in combat. So there are varying numbers there. We know that they had a really tough time of it initially when they first went to Russia to support the Russians in defending Kursk against that incursion. But I think they have subsequently been sort of trained up, and they're a little more able. Originally, they were kind of being sent across open fields in typical meat grinder defensive attacks. Now, there's 5,000 that we hear in terms of North Koreans helping. Pray for me. This was the last TikTok post from a 24-year-old Iraqi, one of hundreds of Arab mercenaries lured by Russian recruiters with promises of $20,000 bonuses and $2,800 a month. The reality, though, is they get deceived, given minimal training, and they are sent into meat grinder assaults. So there's this asymmetry that exists. I talked about this morning. You've got Iraqis, you've got North Koreans, you've got here, my friend signed a contract with, and 10 days later, that was effing it. A student from India signed a contract with the Russian Defense Ministry because he wanted to earn money, and he died just 10 days later, according to his friend. According to him, there was no training. After signing the contract, the young man was immediately sent to the front line near Pokrovsk, Donetsk region. He's now listed as missing in action. He also added that, in addition to his friend, up to five other Indians signed contracts and also died. I presume that's just the ones he knows of in that particular unit, right? We know that many Indians have signed up over the course of the war. So now we've got Iraqis and Arabs, we have North Koreans, we've got Indians, and then we're going to finish it off today with South Africans. The South African government said it's received distress signals from 17 citizens who have joined mercenary forces in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and was working to return them home, according to Reuters. Those statements said the men were lured into fighting under the pretext of lucrative employment contracts. All of them are between 20 and 39 years old and were trapped in the war-torn Donbass region. So very similar stories for a whole host of different foreign mercenary types. Okay. Then we hear that Russia is ending its seasonal draft model, which we were hearing about. Now it's happened officially. It moves to a year-round conscription from 2026. While Russian conscripts are officially barred from being deployed abroad, reports indicate that many are pressured into signing contracts with Russia's defense ministry and then sent to fight in Ukraine. So this is your annual kind of national service conscription, where people within a certain age category are conscripted into the armed forces, and they're not supposed to be able to be used down, say, in a Donbass and inside Ukraine, but they are, I think, helping in places like Kursk, and you have had reports of conscripts dying up there. Also reports of conscripts being, right at the beginning of the war, that actually conscripts ended up going in the invasion, and then subsequently, either conscripts ending up on the front line or being press ganged into signing permanent contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Now, Russia will be able to use new turbojet-powered guided glide bombs capable of hitting up to 200 kilometers deep, and they're going to be using them soon against Ukraine. If not, they already are. Russia, says Christopher Miller from the Financial Times, is using these jet-powered glide bombs to hit targets far beyond the front line, an upgrade to Moscow's arsenal that poses further strains on Ukraine's stretched air defenses. So there are supposedly methods of taking these down in principle. Some claims that they have taken guided glide bombs down and that they actually aren't too dissimilar, especially with these turbojets from cruise missiles. And therefore, you can use the same methods to take them down. I guess one has to again ask, maybe you don't have to ask, because at the end of the day, these things do damage. So you're not just equating it a calculation of whether it's worthwhile against the cost of the munition, because these are pretty cheap, all things considered, right? But it's against the cost of what damage these things do. And although they might not do as much damage as a cruise missile to maybe sensitive infrastructure, these do damage to the front lines and cause an absolute headache for the Ukrainians to undersell the problem. The question is, if you're spending lots of money on intercepting cruise missiles, for example, with some kind of expensive air defense system and munition, and that's how you're taking these down, then you've got to ask, is it worthwhile? I mean, they're some days where they're releasing 250 of these bad boys, and you're thinking, well, 250 air defense missiles is going to be ridiculously expensive to deal with. So really there has to be a better way, a much cheaper way of intercepting these, maybe with some kind of cheaper drone interception, or maybe just getting a really good air defense system close to the front line and shooting down the planes that bloody dropping them. Chris Owicki, another thread from Chris Owicki saying Russia is failing to keep up with Ukraine's drone development. According to Russian war blogger, in a lengthy commentary, the Vorenka Kotenok says, who is stealing Russia's victory in the battlefields in the special military operation? He blames a range of factors, including bureaucratic inertia, commanders' mismanagement of drone specialists, a technological deficit, different approaches, and the staffing of some Russian drone teams with cronies who want what they think are safer roles. He writes, the war in Ukraine is being marked with the creation of a new branch of the armed forces. We are talking about the unmanned systems forces, the use of which has forced a change in the entire tactics of combat operations, forcing not only a rewriting of combat regulations, but also fundamentally new radical decisions to conserve personnel. If we talk about the development of unmanned systems forces, then while all is equal with Ukraine, for example, our forces are growing from the top down, with the Minister and Deputy Minister of Defense personally overseeing the issue, while for the enemy, it has grown from the bottom up horizontally. The Ukrainian Armed Forces Unmanned Systems Forces have developed and continue to develop through volunteer centres. Many civilian specialists have been recruited into the USF, both by them and by us, and it is precisely civilians who are proving their effectiveness in both places. The enemy has created the Ukrainian USF. The commander is an authoritative and effective leader, the so-called Magyar, Robert Brovdi, who initially began developing poultry farms as a businessman, and who approaches the command of a new type of troops based on modern, effective methods. This is a clear example of effective management and encouragement through efficiency. This is a military market that was conceived with the participation of the same Magyar. And if we look at the statistics on the use of the USF, both in Russia and among our counterparts, we will see that the most effective units are those commanded by purely civilian personnel. Interesting. When the USF was created, they were immediately repurposed. Immediately repurposed a military academy for those tasks, complete with the appropriate equipment, military registration specialities, organizational structure, staffing categories, and so on. In our country, the president announced the creation of the Russian USF about 6 months ago, but a commander for the force has still not been appointed, and it's generally unclear what it will be: a separate branch service of the armed forces or a separate service like the Special Operations Forces. So the USF exists, sort of, but it still hasn't been defined as a single coherent staffing structure. They do, but we don't. Yes, we have effective units like Rubicon, which report directly to the Minister of Defence and are evolving. Plus, each military district is creating some form of unmanned regiments and brigades. But these regiments and brigades are far from being staffed by the best specialists. And due to the fact that the armed forces are rife with nepotism, the drone regiments and brigades are filled with cronies who believe they are serving there. That by serving there, they will not have to fight, but will instead command equipment dozens of kilometers away from the front line. So on and so forth. And so it goes on. So it looks like there is, at least for the time being, thankfully, a really good asymmetry, like beneficial asymmetry, a difference between the Russian USF and the Ukrainian USF, with the Ukrainian USF being organized far better and functioning far better, and actually being a functioning thing, whereas the Russian one still doesn't appear to be so. The Russians tried to copy Rubicon, tried to copy Magyar's birds by creating Rubicon, tried to copy the unmanned systems forces by creating their own, but they are lagging behind in both of those areas. However, the Rubicon certainly is much more effective than what the Russians were able to achieve. And in fact, Rubicon, although it's not as good as Magyar's birds, and Magyar himself is a bit of a legend, Rubicon was behind the forced withdrawal of Ukraine from the Kursk region. Now, final couple of nuggets here for you. Here is a video of fiber optic coils that are 50 to 60 kilometers in length that have been provided by entities in Hong Kong. China has been making and supplying these to Russia, and that is a real challenge for the Ukrainians, because Russia is able to rely so heavily on China and their production of huge amounts of different components, whether it be turbojet engines or, in this case, fiber optic reels, 50 to 60 kilometer fiber optic reels. That's going to be very, very useful for the Russians indeed. Now, we have heard that the Ukrainians can operate to that length as well. There was a video of a Russian finding a drone with a 60 kilometer spool on as well from the Ukrainians. But I would assume that the Russians probably have the advantage. They started with fiber optic drones before the Ukrainians did, and they seem to still have a competitive advantage there. So that's going to be a real challenge for the Ukrainians. And Russia has purchased 18,000 combat drones for 500 schools to train teenagers in strike operations, Ukrainian intelligence has reported. By 2030, Moscow plans 1 million drone specialists across 4,872 schools, building infrastructure for sustained warfare. This is, I mean, if this is true, this is actually huge news. So this is Russia essentially signposting that they are gearing up for almost perpetual war. You know, if you're putting things in place whereby by 2030, you plan on having 1 million drone specialists operating across 4,872 schools, then it looks like you aren't just getting, you know, onto a war footing now, but you're preparing yourself to be on a war footing in 5 years' time and beyond. That war appears to be a permanent feature for the Russian nation. It is that is definitely a worry. So yeah, right. That is me done as far as all of the stimulus I have to share with you. Just seeing if there is anything that you guys are adding to the conversation. Of course, there's loads that you guys are adding to the conversation. Thank you for being such a lively live chat, as you always are. And it's really great because actually I don't have time when I'm just, there's so much information to impart. I can't take it easy and check out these comments and see if there's anything particularly useful for you, for us to talk about. So thank you. I know that Benny Pie is working on making sure notifications are going to Discord. Please check out the Discord channel. It's linked below. I need to get on there and probably look at my messages and whatnot on Discord. Apologies to anyone who has been messaging me. Yeah, and thank you to the mods. Here we have Paul Sweeney saying, JP has to deal with bots on a daily basis. It's only right he flipped the script. I'm not sure what that is in reply to, but apparently I flipped a script. I like the sound of that. I'd like to know what script I flipped. But that sounds brilliant. So yeah, take that, bots. If I've done something there, I don't know. But thank you, mods, who might have flipped the script on my behalf. Yes. So this is something I want to know about. Don't think we're going to do too much talking about this because I don't know the answer. Lots of people have said that the Gripen E is because it uses the General Electric's engine from America, which means it's not ITAR free. It means that you have to get the American permission for Gripen to be given to or used by or whatever. What you really want from a European point of view is to have a European bit of kit that you can do whatever you want with without having to get permission from the US. So what they were looking at doing is replacing the General Electric's motor engine with a Rolls-Royce engine, and the Rolls-Royce engine, by all accounts, is much better. So it won't just be a case of, we need to make this ITAR free, but actually we're also going to improve the performance of the Gripen. Now, many people have said, well, the Gripen E does have a Rolls-Royce engine. I don't think it does. I don't, not at the moment. So I think it still is a General Electric's engine. And it is thought that this could happen, but I don't necessarily think it has happened, or even that it's imminently going to happen. I think it may still be in the discussion phase or the ideas phase, but it may not be. It may also be happening. I don't know. If someone knows more than me, that would, that's going to be possible, right? Please let me know. So Vigo here says, wonder how the replacement of the GE engine with the one from Rolls-Royce changes the Gripen's performance specs and flight characteristics. There's a video on this, I think, that I was watching that talks through the better performance, I think, from the Rolls-Royce engine. Yeah, it is. You can go and find that out somewhere, I'm sure, on YouTube. What else? AJ Simo, really appreciate you. Definitely, you are the one that flipped the script, I'm sure. I take full credit for flipping the script, whatever that means, but it was me, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that, AJ. Without a shadow of doubt in my mind, it was you that helped me to flip the script. You didn't do it alone. It was you and me both. Rolls-Royce do indeed have pedigree with engines, with jet engines. So yes. Okay. Yeah, I reported this morning, actually, in my hits and losses video, King Raccoon. A fire broke out at the Naftan oil refinery in Belarus, damaging a diesel processing unit. I'd love to know who was responsible for that, because we've had similar in both Slovakia and Hungary, and no one's really too sure on who's behind it. But it looks rather suspicious that three refineries dealing with Russian hydrocarbons have had some suspicious fires in the space of a couple of weeks. Right. I don't know if there's anything else to discuss with you. Just thank you very, very much for all of you wonderful people supporting the channel. And in fact, that's where we're going to go to now. I've already thanked Mark Bisky, who's a total legend. Mark, I must put on the Vivashankar that you guys sent me. Vishivanka. Sorry, Vishivanka. Remember, it's Rishi Sunak, Rishi Wanker, Vishivanka. That's how I have to remember it. I have to go through that process in my head. So I need to find an excuse. I think tomorrow might be an excuse. Friday. It's Friday tomorrow. It's Hampshire Vishivanka Day. So I'm wearing that tomorrow. Yeah, you can look out for that. Mal, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. You total legend. Thank you. Daryl Thomas with his fine head of hair there. Thank you for your super sticker. I really appreciate your support, mate. And I think we have another Mal here. Mal Wright. If it wasn't for North Korea, China, and the orange-faced git, I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know who that could be. In the White House. Oh, Donald Trump, right. I think Ukraine could have already prevailed. Now, I sort of agree with you. We'll finish on this. Let's finish on a bit of a open discussion. I actually think China have helped Ukraine, and maybe it's unrealistic to think, look, everyone can help Ukraine, but no one can help Russia, and no one's allowed to help Russia. That's how it should be morally and politically. But the reality is that that's never going to happen. But if we had a situation where, North Korea were unable to help Russia and was stopped from helping Russia, and China was stopped from helping Russia, and Iran, so you need to throw Iran into that mix as well, then Russia on its own would not have been able to do what it's done. Kursk, you think of all the Shaheds that were initially provided by Iran, and you think of all the artillery ammunition that at some points it was thought that, what was it, 50% or maybe more, was it 60%, 40, 50, 60% of artillery ammunition being used in Ukraine by Russia was provided by North Korea. If you think of the amount of engines and components and drones and all sorts that China is providing for Russia, and then you could even stretch it further to look at hydrocarbons production, not hydrocarbons exporting to China as well, so on and so forth. I honestly think Ukraine would be in a vastly different situation. It really, really would. I think that they would still be up in Kursk probably. That Rubicon unit's probably depended an awful lot on Chinese assistance. Anyway, I really do think that things would be different had those nations not been able to help the Russians so obviously and so much, and it seems to be just increasing and increasing. The amount of assistance that China gives to Russia. It's pretty worrying. But thank you so much to everyone. Thanks, Dave Ox, Zeb Carter, Noel Grace 99, Julian Roster, Total Ledge, Wizard of Ooze. Thank you to Mark Bisque, Mal, Daryl Thomas, Mal Rate as well. Thank you. In the meantime, I appreciate all of your support. And just the last thing, thank you for posting the Discord, Cheryl. Hopefully soon we can put up the atpgo.com/donate, because Ziggersport, when I was listening to Dimko say it the other day, I say Jiggersport, but he said Ziggersport. So I think it's Ziggersport. They've reached out and said, in fact, I'll say to you what they've said, because hopefully this will be a good idea. Hello again. Do you currently have any active fundraisers? No, I don't. We visited the 80th Brigade in our recent trip, and they need 2 quad bikes. We already have support from the 2 Knee Tuesday team to cover one, and we're looking for a partner to help with the second. The cost is around $15,000. Would you be open to joining the fundraiser? This is both to me and Jonathan Fink. And I'm like, yeah, for show. So they should be getting me some deets on that, and then we can help get a quad bike, and that'd be pretty cool. I like the sound of that. Anyway, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you. Take care, and I will speak to you soon. I desperately need a cup of tea. Like, I don't think I've needed a cup of tea more in my life than right now. My throat has been destroyed by just constantly talking to the internet. But I'm not just talking to the internet, I'm talking to the team, and you guys rule. So take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Slava Ukraini.